Good evening, everybody present here in Facebook and YouTube Live. This is Rudra Das, taking this privilege to warmly welcome all to World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021 and 22. Invitations to global dialogue on agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social science and policy frames, an initiative towards think tanks and rethink episteme. Distinguished participants, partakers, it's a glorious moment to extend my warmest wishes on behalf of Center for ADIVASI Research and Development. As this international conference is built with an intent of active and interactive learning and discussion organized by Center for ADIVASI Research and Development in collaboration with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University. On behalf of our center, I want to convey my heartfelt gratitude to our patrons, Professor Sanjay Kumar Naik, Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Professor Mahadev Joyswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, and Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha. The convener of this largest virtual conference, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahiji. The main outcome of this conference is to come up with national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technology such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, social issues, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID-19. We hope this conference would be help students, faculties, researchers, and everyone to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know that our center is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. And our prime agenda of this institution is to come up with potential policy solution for social change while believing in the idea of debate, dialogue, and discussion. The institute focuses on marginalized communities and works for their livelihood, protect the nature, culture, and language identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomenon for societal purpose to enhance knowledge. And our information work for them is methodical and avoids paradoxically frameworks which is neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. Our center sincerely believes in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. Our center come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education and to fill the gaps to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. Ladies and gentlemen, in this evening, it's a very important issue to talk about, and it gives me a tremendous contentment to introduce the most esteemed personality of our country, Professor Ajit Mohanty. Professor Mohanty is a former professor of psychology and ICSSR National Fellow and former professor of psychology from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And he's a very professional and well-known think tank of our country, and his long career as a professor, and he's also contributions to the society. Contribution to the society is very helpful. Definitely, the present topic that suggested by Professor Mohanty is bureaucratic subjugation of Odisha Universities. Is there any hope? There is a big question in this subject, and to talk about and to discuss about this massive, important, and need of the hour discussion, I would like to invite Professor Mohanty to start the session with his note. Thank you, sir. Please, sir, welcome.
Namaskar, and thanks to all of you for joining this occasion. I'm particularly happy that the Center for Tribal Research and Development card is organizing this event. I know that the event has many broader purposes, but these purposes are at least indirectly related to what is happening to universities. Because if we are talking about public policy, if we are talking about how scientific research and education can contribute to development of society, then I think it is relevant to understand that without autonomy, the universities, centers of higher education and research are nowhere. That's a minimum condition. To my mind, a university actually is defined by its autonomy. Therefore, whether or not autonomy is a legal provision doesn't matter. What matters is if we recognize a center of learning, center of higher education and research as a university, then we need to recognize its autonomy, because autonomy is inseparable from the concept of a university. We are actually concerned about Odisha right now. But at the same time, let me remind you that this concern about autonomy of universities, adequate funding and development of universities is actually global. Universities and centers all over the world are actually worried of loss of freedom and autonomy. Some of you may know that UNESCO and its member states have always been concerned about scientific research and status of higher education and universities. So UNESCO responded to this increasing threat to university freedom and autonomy by a declaration as early as 1997 on higher education and protection of freedom of academic institutions. There was another UNESCO conference in Paris on the World Teachers' Day on the 5th of October 2017, about 5 years back. And that conference actually reiterated the resolve of 1997 and lamented the limited resources and funding support to institutions of higher education, limiting their capacity building functions and functions relating to scientific research and the promulgation of higher education. Actually, we know that the universities are becoming increasingly vulnerable to external pressure. And one of the reasons for that is funding. Because higher education, unlike other countries in the world, continues to be quite cheap, unless you go for the privatized education. Public higher education continues to be cheap, and therefore universities as such do not have their own resources, and they have to depend on the government funding. But at the same time, let us not forget that government funding is not really something that the government is doling out there is some noise actually. Okay. So government funding doesn't come as a boon or as a gratuity to the universities. Government funding is public funding. It is the public taxpayers' money which the government is spending, and government is responsible for providing minimum living conditions to the public. Welfare economists have long told us, Amartya Sen and others, that there are two sectors, education and health, in which the government should invest. Therefore, that the government is spending money for the universities is not an argument as to why universities will be taken over by the government and controlled by the government. Government money, what else can they do? It's their duty. Governments are elected to spend public money, taxpayers' money in the most appropriate manner, and therefore higher education comes as a part of that that duty of the government to support higher education and university education. And therefore, the argument that the universities are being supported by the government does not mean that the university will be taken over by the government. You know, before I go into the specific instance of Odisha University and Odisha Universities Amendment Act of 2020, which actually took away the basic freedom and dignity of the universities, let me reflect a little bit on what has actually what has been our tradition in Indian context. I think if you look into the origin of universities in India, in fact, it is India where the notion of universities actually started. And because universities, the government, you know, in India, centers of learning, centers of knowledge and wisdom, and centers of philosophy have been at the center, at the core of the society and social policy. In our own state, for example, in Odisha, Puspagiri and Lalitagiri were actually are more than 2,500 years old. And thereafter, you know, after Puspagiri and Lalitagiri, you have other national centers of learning and higher education and reflection in Takasila, Nalanda, and Bikramshila. So these centers were actually centers for reflection and thinking on, say, religion, on philosophy, on logic, and many of them, particularly if we are talking about Puspagiri and Lalitagiri, many of them were also centers of Buddhist thinking and Tantra. They also engaged with medical sciences or physiological sciences. They also engaged in chemistry in the form that was available those days. And these centers were obviously supported by the royal patronage, definitely. For example, the king Dharmapal actually established, he didn't establish, but he sort of supported fully the Bikramshila University more than 1,000 years ago. And that was the university. I'm particularly talking about Bikramshila because Bikramshila was the first university in the world which actually started giving what was called the Upadhi, you know, giving recognition in terms of Pandit, Mahapandit, and that kind of recognition. It was like a degree. So there were ceremonial offerings of degree in Bikramshila University about 1,000 years ago. And therefore, and thereafter, actually, if you look at world universities, particularly European universities, which started much later, they also started giving degrees. So convocation kind of thing, a formal occasion where the degrees and recognitions were given. And in case of Bikramshila, it was Pandit, Mahapandit, that kind of recognition, which are given on the basis of consideration of learning and efficacy of a particular thinker or particular scholar or particular student. So that was a long-standing tradition, and but in any case, the universities became primarily the centers of religious discourse and critical reflection on aspects of religion and various other life-related knowledge systems. Now, there are two sources of income for sustenance of these universities in the ancient times. One was, particularly in case of Indian universities, there are many scholars who came from abroad, China and other places. Scholars actually congregated into the centers of learning in India as knowledge dissemination process, as involved in research. And so they actually brought many of them. There are no formal required fees in the universities, but they, when they joined the centers, they carried a lot of gifts in form of gold or other gifts for the universities, which was one source of income. And the other source was funding by the government. Sorry, by the king and his treasurer. But that never meant that the king was controlling the university. Kings in the ancient Indian university tradition actually did not control the universities. In fact, the university or the centers of learning were considered at a higher pedestal than the government, than the royal court or the king and all that. They were considered above all these. But nevertheless, the royal patronage, royal support for universities did continue. Therefore, it's difficult, if you go by our tradition, it is difficult to imagine a state where the universities are completely controlled by the state, by the bureaucratic processes. And we know that what happened actually in case of Odisha universities. Because what happened there, that was actually the past promulgation of ordinance actually took place, I think, about few days before actually a day before, in fact, September 4th, the ordinance was promulgated, and that was the day before the Teachers' Day. And what is even sad is that the government did not engage into a process of consultation. It would have been appropriate for the government to engage in a process of public consultation with the former educationists or retired educationists, researchers, scientists, not just in the state, but all over the country, to engage in a process of a dialogue as to how the universities would improve. Apparently, the concern that the justification that the government of Odisha gave for bringing the universities under bureaucratic control is that the universities are not functioning well. I think we need to remember that the universities are not functioning well, which I don't deny. Yes, every institution has a scope of further development. No institution, no system is absolute. No system is so well developed that it cannot be further developed. Even the best of the universities in the world have a scope for further development. Therefore, that the universities needed to be needed some kind of course correction, or needed some kind of improvement in their standards, and all that is undeniable. But that improvement is not brought about by exercising control and choking the universities out of their basic freedom. You do not improve a system by completely bringing it under your control and subjugating it under a bureaucratic system. Because we know that the bureaucratic system is also not operating ideally. They also have a scope to grow. So what happened actually as a result, I think what is happening now, if you look back as to why, one wonders why was it necessary for the government to encroach into the basic freedom and dignity of a university, particularly in Odisha. I think, apart from the fact that systems like bureaucracy, for example, have always a tendency to control. The bureaucratic system is by definition a system which seeks to bring everything under the control of a set of rules and regulations. Therefore, controlling an organization, controlling a system, controlling an institution is a part of that kind of a design. But more importantly, and particularly in this case, we need to realize that the private universities are becoming extremely important. It's a business. I call it the business of education. Just because there is a larger population in India and a growing number of people who are very rich, the private universities cater to the need of the rich who cannot just compete with the others in entering into the public universities, because there are processes of selection, processes of entrance, examination and all that. And therefore a large section of our society, particularly the upper class society, they have the students who cannot by their own merit enter into the public system of education. So what happens? They pay huge amounts of money and huge sums of money to get into the private universities. And private universities are one of the best investment now in Indian economic system is private universities. Everybody is entering into that kind of a business because it's a lucrative business. Now, a further trend has started that you bring in, because a large number of our Indian students tend to go out, spend a lot of money in order to be educated in UK, in Australia, in USA and in Canada, because some people have money, the upper class society, and that's what they do. Therefore, what is now happening, the new trend is that the universities outside are collaborating with the private universities in order to give an illusion of a virtual international university and university education, and therefore large sums of money are paid. So there is the private education lobby is extremely powerful. It's not just the university system, it's beginning from the school system. More than 40% of children in India are now in English medium schools, private English medium schools, because that is actually a good business. A lot of people have money to pay. And therefore the society is actually getting segregated into a segment of population which can buy private education, and another segment which is helpless, they have to depend on public education. So that widening gap between haves and have-nots is actually affecting our educational system. And unfortunately, our political processes are controlled by the people who have money. The nexus between politicians, the businessmen, the bureaucrats, and crime, all this is actually affecting public policy in many ways.
Okay.
So what happens is hello, yeah. What happens is there's a conspiracy to completely downgrade the public education system so that the private education thrives. The poorer the quality of public education, the better is the profit-making private education business. Therefore, we all need to realize this, that there is a sort of implicit complicity between the public processes and the political processes and the private universities as well as private educational business. It's a big business. So any attempt to undermine our public universities by the government or by the bureaucratic process or by the political process is to be seen in that context. It's not that they really want the universities to improve. It is that they want the universities to deteriorate so that private universities are supreme. And we know that in Odisha, there are several very significant, very influential, rich players in the field of private education, which is actually gradually tending to override the public education system. Therefore, we need to be aware of that kind of a conspiracy in the political process, the conspiracy of the private education lobby. So what happens? What actually happened is the universities in Odisha were being systematically undermined for a long time. It's not just 2020 with the ordinance that the process began. The process had started much earlier. It started when there was indiscriminate opening of new universities. I have written about this earlier, much earlier, actually, several years back. It's like, whenever people vie for a higher educational institution or some recognition or for a university and all that, instead of systematically controlling, systematically deliberating as to where and how the new educational institutions can be started or new recognition be given, the political processes wanted to democratize higher education completely, open it up. So when a particular area demanded a university and there was a committee set up, this has happened quite often. If you look into the process of starting the universities beyond Utkal, Barampur and Sambalpur universities, if you look into creation of other universities, you will notice that these universities have been created because of political compulsions. When one university was in question, there was a committee, for example, Professor G.K. Das and others who was the Vice Chancellor of Utkal University, they constituted a committee for a new university somewhere. North Odisha University or Baleshwar, or these are the possible sites, Keonjhar and Baripada and Baleshwar regions. What was the outcome? They recommended a particular place. They took into consideration the demands, local demands from local demands from Baleshwar, Baripada and Keonjhar and other regions, and they had made a suggestion for one university somewhere. But what did the government do? Government, having received that report for one university, declared that there will be 3 universities. One in Baripada, one in Baleshwar, and subsequently one in Keonjhar also. So it's like, I tell that it's like a story of a king who went to see a football match. And he was very disgusted. He said, why is it that all these 22 players are running after one football? So the king decreed that let us give one football to every player so that they don't have to fight with each other. And that was the game. So that is what is happening in Odisha. The universities are getting created almost without any consideration of funding and all that. If you do not have enough funds, why do you create universities which are so poverty stricken that they cannot even maintain themselves? So what happened, initially it started with a large number of Odisha's colleges being declared as autonomous colleges. Anything, any private college or anything where, autonomous. What did they do? The university UGC system of autonomous college was created in order to create centers of autonomous learning where each college would be able to develop its own syllabus, develop its own program, which will be completely different from other programs. But what actually happened is that universities, these colleges which became autonomous, having been separated and isolated from the university control. Earlier, they were affiliated to the universities, but what autonomous college meant is they will no longer remain affiliated to the university as such. They will no longer be controlled by the university's academic council and other regulations. They will form their own regulation. They will form their own syllabi. They will have their own system of evaluation, examination, and all that, and they will offer degrees which are distinct in many ways. But what in fact happened is the universities started, the autonomous colleges started only replicating the same university syllabus. If you look now into the syllabi of the autonomous colleges, you will find they are no different from the university syllabus. So what were they doing? They were only replicating, but giving more degrees. And it will not be surprising that more than 90% of the students in autonomous colleges got first-class degrees. So what we were doing in effect, the government was doing in effect, by allowing a large number of colleges, private as well as public, government colleges, to become autonomous, they were actually not providing them autonomy, but they were trying to sort of give them a new nomenclature with UGC support so that they could only replicate what the university was doing at a smaller level. So if you look into this, so gradually the autonomy became redundant. And then there came a point where the government of Odisha said that all the autonomous colleges will have a common control system. So what they did is a common date in which elections will be held, common date in which entrance test will be held, a common date in which the examinations will be held, more or less the same syllabus and all that. Everything came under the control of the higher education department. So autonomy became meaningless. Autonomous colleges, so-called autonomous colleges. How did the government respond to that? Government started declaring many of these autonomous colleges as universities. So another step. Apparently they were doing something new, but they were actually further creating conditions of impoverishment for the universities in Odisha. Because already the existing universities, the government cannot provide adequate funding. 99.9% of the grant given to the universities are only for salary, pension and all that. There is nothing, no support for research and development, absolutely no support. Now, how can you expect the universities to grow unless research is supported, unless a new thinking is supported? There is nothing. You just, all you do is maintain the universities by just providing the salary and providing some maintenance grant, which is not adequate. So the buildings become dilapidated, the houses, quarters for the faculty and non-teaching staff are not repaired, and the universities have a very poor look, and the system is so overburdened with its own maintenance problem that system has no scope for growth and development. So that is what was happening to universities. Government started creating new and almost like overnight declaration, okay, so and so college is now a university. Whereas Barampur University, Kalikot College became another university. They went on creating universities like anything, and didn't even have funds to support. Many universities had to wait for years to get a building of their own, and were functioning from some rented houses or some other places and all that. So the question that we need to realize that it is a duty of the state to provide quality education, quality higher education to the students and all that. And but what was actually happening is that in the name of funding, government started exercising more and more control over the universities. That had started, is not 2020. It had started much earlier. 1989 change in the University Act also had empowered a deputy secretary of the government of Odisha to write a memo to the university and abolish its statutory provisions. So statute could be amended not by the university as such. Earlier, what was the system? University, if you wanted statute amendment, it has to be considered at different levels, academic council, senate of the university. It has to go to the syndicate, and syndicate, if it approves, then it goes to the chancellor for final assent. That was no longer the case. Any government system, by moving files, a deputy secretary one day will write that your system of selection will be this, will the following. So acts and statutes were actually changed in order to bring in more control. So it's 2020 is only the ultimate system which actually took away the autonomy of the universities, but the autonomies were being encroached upon for a long time. So the question that one has to consider, that when government brought in this 2020 first ordinance and then act, was there a vision to it? Let us say, okay, government is wise enough. The bureaucratic system as well as the elected government system, it has the wisdom to regulate the university, wisdom to know that this is what is needed for the universities. So, when government is bringing about some kind of a change by encroaching on the university's autonomy and university system, they ought to have a vision. Whenever you are creating a new university, universities are given a vision statement. They have a vision, what is this that they want to achieve in the long run. Do you think that the 2020 Amendment Act, which took away the university's freedom and dignity, did that Amendment Act have a vision of its own? What kind of universities do they want by controlling, by bureaucratic control? So only thing that happened is right after the 2020 Act, the universities became equivalent to the government colleges and to private colleges, or even inferior to that. Because all the government letters, if you have seen any of these government letters about the universities, it is written, the subject line would say that this particular thing will be done in all Odisha universities coming under the administrative control of the higher education department. That was the line which is written in every letter, a standard line, that Odisha universities coming under the administrative control of higher education department. Now, is that the vision? That you control everything and don't have a plan as to how universities can be improved by your control? See, there have been committees, I know, for political mileage. Now and then, committees are constituted to create that vision. I think somewhere, when was it? We had a committee by Professor Trilochan Pradhan. When was it? I'm trying to remember. I think 2009, perhaps. 2009, no, before that, actually, a few years before that, they had a committee constituted by Professor Trilochan Pradhan and some other educationists in order to look into the systems of higher education, particularly universities, and give a set of policy recommendations for higher education. So there was a policy committee. The policy committee submitted its report, Trilochan Pradhan committee. Now, that was 2009. The committee submitted its report, but the report was gathering dust somewhere in the higher education department in the secretariat. And everybody forgot about it, that such a committee was constituted, a lot of money spent on the visits of the committee, deliberations and all that. Committee had very faithfully submitted a report. Professor Pradhan, late Professor Pradhan, was a very serious academician, educationist and researcher. And he had given some thoughtful suggestions, but those suggestions were gathering dust in the corridors of in the higher education department files. Then all of a sudden somebody again points out, then there was another committee constituted in 2017 headed by Professor Shiva Prasad Adhikari, who was the Vice Chancellor, I think, of the North Odisha University. 2017 April, the committee gave its report. So there was one committee which was considered, which was constituted in 2009. It gave its report. The report was never made public. Report was never discussed. No action was taken on the report. And then another committee was constituted, again for the same purpose, for higher education. So 2017 April, the Professor Adhikari, Shiva Prasad Adhikari committee gave its report. And that report also was never even considered. Nobody, I don't think anybody ever read that report. So report after report, you do it just because you want to show to the public that we are concerned about the quality of higher education, quality of universities, and therefore we are constituting committees of academicians to make some recommendations. But what is the use of that committee? That except that the committee spends some public money and then comes up with a report which has absolutely no value. So that is what the government of Odisha has done another committee after committee, and nothing happens. And then in 2020, they decide that they need to take control of the universities. 2020, this year in which this act was passed, Government of India came up with a new education policy. And that policy, those of you who have seen the policy categorically decided that even all centers of higher education, not just universities, but all centers of higher education, meaning colleges, would be independent, autonomous degree granting institutions. There are some recommendations in the policy document as to how higher educational institutions such as degree granting colleges and universities will be distinguished. But the basic principle of autonomy of all institutions of higher education was accepted, was recommended in the new education policy. And Government of Odisha is a party to that. There was a presidential meeting convened on the new education policy. Government of Odisha was represented, and they declared their commitment to the policy. Now, on the one hand, you make a commitment to a national policy which talks about autonomy, and on the other hand, you take away the basic autonomy of universities by an act. So you need to sort of understand what exactly happening. What is happening is that having deprived the universities of basic support, funding support and everything else, even some interest in functioning of the universities, the Odisha government over the years has reduced all the universities to sort of dilapidated state, ruined state, a state of impoverishment. And then they still, having not been satisfied with that kind of impoverishment, they still want to take control of the universities and subject them to further indignity and further ruin. It's very sad. I'm reminded of a story by Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran writes a story that there is a huge a demon who is destroying everything. Is demon who has the mask of a human face, but it's a demon who is constantly engaging in destroying whatever he finds, just buildings and structures and everything. Then somebody asked the demon that, what are you doing? Why are you just destroying everything? You are breaking everything apart. Have you not satisfied your desire to destroy? Then the demon replies that, well, my hunger or my thirst for destruction is somewhat reduced, yes. But then if I stop doing it, then whatever has been left, they are already in ruinous state. They will be destroyed. So I will have nothing to do. I will have no more destruction to have. That is why I continue destroying things. I think that is exactly what the government of Odisha is doing. They have ruined the university systems to a point of complete impoverishment. And having ruined that, they still continue to have this kind of a 2020 act of amending the universities and taking control, because there will be nothing else to ruin if they continue with the existing system. So, in order to quench this thirst for ruining higher education, I think again, I'm reminded of, or I'm reminding you of the conspiracy of the private education systems or private universities and all that. So the task, the objective is to create a total destruction of the system so that the private universities will thrive. Because universities will lose their meaning, will lose their dignity, will lose their autonomy, will lose their distinctiveness. Why would a student go there? So they would rather beg, buy, or borrow um, private education, paying whatever they can. So that is the conspiracy. I think we need to realize what is happening. Because the Odisha University Act actually on the September, in the initial ordinance, on the day before the Guru Divas, on the September 4th of 2020, it really made basic changes. I will end soon, briefly giving you what happened. They took away the basic structure, the basic freedom of all the universities, so it's a kind of a rare act of usurpation of essential autonomy of the universities, and I think a blatant imposition of excessive bureaucratic control. In one stroke, actually, the ordinance or the act, actually, the Amendment Act, stifles the power on functions of all the universities systems and all in university education, university institutions. The syndicate, for example, is completely taken over by the government. The majority of the members in the syndicate are government employees or government officials or nominated by the government. And therefore, the out of 25 members, 13 are already directly government-controlled members. But even as if that is not enough, what is now happening in the universities, after the syndicate meeting, the decisions are recorded by the registrar, who is a government employee, and he sends it to the higher education department, and higher education department corrects that. Their meeting took place in the university syndicate, but it is the higher education, some clerk or some secretary or deputy secretary there is correcting that document in order to write back to the registrar saying that this is the minutes of your syndicate. So syndicate absolutely has no power now. The Senate is abolished. And so I think the act actually limits the independent power of the chancellor also. Earlier, actually, see, chancellor, governor of Odisha is ex officio chancellor of many universities, but constitutionally, the powers of governor and powers of chancellor are different. A governor is bound by the advice of the cabinet, government and the cabinet, whereas chancellor is not bound by the advice of the cabinet. So chancellor is more an independent power, which gives the chancellor a power over the universities. But that also has been taken away, particularly in matters of selection and appointment of vice chancellors, and also into the his power to inquire into affairs of the university. So the overall supremacy of the chancellor in running the universities have been taken away. Chancellor's power, for example, to nominate a member to the selection committee for vice chancellor is now restricted under the ordinance, under the act. It says the chancellor can only nominate someone who is a former chief secretary rank officer of the government. Earlier, the practice was to chancellor to nominate an eminent academician. That is what the UGC guideline actually says. UGC guideline 2018 and there are earlier guidelines always said that vice chancellor should be an academician, a reputed professor and researcher, and he should be selected by a committee which consists of academicians. But with this new act, the university vice chancellors will be selected by a committee which has a member as the former chief secretary, a government nominee, and a UGC nominee. So you can see that what is happening is there is systematic attempt to control the universities, to undermine the role of the chancellor, to completely undermine the role of a vice chancellor, even to less, even to a role of indignity. I think one would prefer to be a principal of a college rather than vice chancellor of a university, because vice chancellor of university has no role in appointing even a class 4 employee. Vice chancellor has absolutely no role in appointing non-teaching staff, in appointing faculty members. So what is happening is, what is the status of a vice chancellor? Why would the university and its system take a vice chancellor to be a leader of the university? Because the vice chancellor doesn't have any power. He doesn't control the bureaucratic system in the university. He doesn't control the teaching processes. He doesn't control the faculty. He's not an employer of them. He doesn't employ them. So the UGC guideline has always said consistently, the vice chancellor will be the chairman of the selection committee for selection of university teachers and all that, and he will also appoint the non-teaching staff. Now, with this kind of a new act, what has happened is the total university system has been relegated to a position of indignity. Now, what is happening is the vice chancellors are told by the bureaucratic system, by the Secretary of Higher Education or by its subordinate officers, that this is the day on which your university will declare a holiday. This is the day on which you will have your own entrance test to universities, to the different courses in the university. These are the courses you can open, these are the courses you cannot open. And the entire process is given to the Odisha Public Service Commission in order to appoint. Okay, there are problems with the university making its own appointment. That is also partly because government would sanction, would approve the selection process. They were delaying that. They are responsible. Partly, I'm not saying that 100% responsible, they are responsible. But just to deal with this question of large number of unfilled positions in the universities, they created a system where OPSC will make the selection. What is happening now? What is happening is, let us say, a faculty requirement in geology in one university and same faculty requirement of geoinformatics in another university, and maybe applied geology or some other discipline, they are all clubbed together under one discipline, geology. Similarly, history, ancient Indian history, modern Indian history, archaeology and museum studies, they are all clubbed under history. Now, universities get their posts created with the UGC approval or UGC sanction. Universities submit proposals to open some new disciplines and more sophisticated, more interdisciplinary centers, and that is the posts which are given by the UGC in most cases. But now what is happening, whether the post is for ancient Indian history or the post is for medieval history or the post is for archaeology and all that, they all, OPSC will select professors or assistant professors, associate professors in history and appoint them in a department of archaeology. So the question is, the entire university system has been actually subjected to humiliation, and that is what is being challenged now. We did challenge that, but there are other. I did not go into the dynamics of what happened in the. I will respond to the question. I'm completing in another minute, 1 minute. So this is being challenged, and obviously I was one of the persons who challenged the act in the High Court. There are also many other petitions against it. Somehow the High Court didn't take a sympathetic view of our position. Now we have gone to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has stayed that, and despite the stay, the state government and the OPSC go on merrily with continuing what they were doing. And UGC has recently written to the state government and to OPSC, restraining them from defying the Supreme Court orders. That's the constitutional order. So the point, therefore, the idea of cracking a common bureaucratic whip on all the universities is horrifying, actually, and they signal a common pattern, common entrance test, common syllabi, common examination, common results. Intellectual pluralism. We need to have diversity in intellectual pursuits in research and higher education. That is completely given a go by. So intellectual pluralism is actually, as in my view, is a necessary condition for meaningful and creative academic engagement. No single tool is omnicompetent, as Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, actually told us. There is no such thing as a master key that will unlock all doors. So bureaucratic control is certainly not that master key, and it is certainly not the omnicompetent tool. We need to be aware of it. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you have time and all that, I will take questions. We can discuss further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful deliberation. Now, I'd like to. There is a question from the side of Professor Lakshmikant Mishra. So, Professor Mishra, please ask if you want to ask something to Professor Mohanty.
Rudra, 1 minute. First call Shravan back to go for a quick comment, then ask question by each and individual, everyone, right?
Okay. Please, Professor Bag.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think others can.
Sir, namaskar, sir. Sir, Shravan Koot.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Sir, happy to see you after so many days.
Thank you. Bhalo achandi.
हाँ sir, bhalo achi sir. All your blessings. And first of all, I'm really thankful, not only on the part of the global forum, but also as a man who is very much interested to the larger issues of education. It's really one of the very eye-opening and very vibrant session, I must say. And those of you who know Professor Ajit Mohanty, he is not only a man of policy, but also a man of practice. And when a man of practice says, it carries a lot of importance. So taking this ahead, sir, thank you so much for giving us a very a wide and very clear-cut picture what is going on in and around the higher education scenario, and unfolding several myths and facts that are remaining very hidden out of the common people. So my question, in fact, my reflection would be on three things. First of all, sir, that as we all know that decentralization has been one of the core principles of our entire education system, right? But particularly with this Act of Odisha University Act, don't we see that this core principle has somewhere been violated? If yes, how can we, address this? Number one. Number two, sir, as you have rightly mentioned that the new education policy is now on board, and we all know what is there in the policy. Sir, in the new education policy, there is also a provision that private universities other than in the Indian universities will venture. They have the scope to operate, maybe physically, maybe virtually in Indian scenario. So don't we see that this in Odisha University Act is also somewhere a mini reflection and replica of what is there at a larger level? If so, Odisha may be taken as a one sample and could see that what could happen or what would happen at a larger level when we are giving space to private universities, as you have rightly mentioned. Third one is that you have rightly talked about autonomy, and you have somewhere also touched upon the accountability part. So my question, rather my submission would be, we all know what is happening. Like many of us who are associated with the education system, we all know what is happening. And in fact, we have witnessed what has happened over the years as far as the elementary education is concerned. And this is how that same nexus is going to build up in the higher education system. So, sir, what could be the possible solution? Like there are limitations, right? But what could be the solution? Because we all know that somewhere it is motivated by some sort of vested interest, political agenda, and there are several other factors. But by and large, the problem remains same. So how could we challenge or how could we address that? If you could, reflect on that, then it would be really, boon to all the listeners. And thank you so much, sir, for really setting the tone for the next level of discussion. We will be definitely having, looking forward for your kind presence, because as the state is moving towards a new direction and the new education policy has also started, probably your reflection, your such kind of ideas would help us also to take the journey ahead. Please, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, do you want me to respond or do you want the questions to be taken up? Or should I respond? I think let me respond to the issues that you have very rightly raised, and then we can take up specific questions. See, I fully agree that the small issues actually divert attention from the bigger issues. Yes, there are issues, for example, of selection. I know that there are many people who had applied for university positions. Either this was delayed or they were not selected. These were the disgruntled people who supported that OPSC should take it over. So this was a smaller thing, my own personal interest that universities didn't select me, and therefore let me go through OPSC and see if I am selected. I'm saying that including OPSC selection or UPSC selection, no selection process is perfect. There will be, obviously, if you have a selection committee, you have examinations, you have viva voce or whatever, and there will be all these will be subjected to various chance factors. It's nothing is completely determined by one's own ability. And therefore, I think we need to realize that and say that instead of, before I say that, okay, universities cannot select their own people, let them be selected from outside by an outside agency. Now that outside agency, will it do complete justice to the whole thing? I have given you examples where they are doing injustice. Each department of university has its own focus, its own area of specialization accepted by the UGC. Now all of a sudden, even if you have an area of specialization, you get a faculty imposed on you by OPSC or other system, which doesn't support your own specialization of the center, university center. So there are issues, and unfortunately what is happening is the small benefit or projected small benefits actually override the larger interest of the higher education in the state. Now, the question that you raised about the decentralization of being a core of education, I fully agree. Decentralization, because higher education, unlike lower school, high school education, or even early college education, they cannot be uniform. We can expect a grade 1 child to learn few things. Okay, numbers, writing, reading, writing, and all that. Okay, we know that some literacy, some numeracy skills are extremely essential for a child in class 1. But as the child goes into higher levels of education, there is more of a diversity. And particularly higher education must be diverse. Because if you continue teaching and doing the hackneyed, the traditional, then the new knowledge will never come. Let us not forget that we have gone through the world, actually. I'm not talking about Odisha or anything. World has gone through an information age. World has gone through the age of knowledge, from information to knowledge. And now we are about to, worldwide, we are about to enter what is called a phase of wisdom. So from information system to knowledge system to wisdom system. Wisdom system, if you look into the philosophy of the wisdom system and the projection by the eminent thinkers on the shape of the wisdom society, we are entering a wisdom society where the citizenry as well as the institutions would be self-governing. So if you have an educational institution, the teachers, the students would determine what they want to do. Is it not possible for a group of students and teachers to meet and decide that this is what is important for them, rather than having an imposed course burdened on them? They should be able to decide. So in a wisdom society, it is the specialists, the teachers as well as researchers will take control, and the classroom system will be different. In the classroom system, the students and the teachers will engage into or enter into a contract as to what is it that they want to learn. Who am I to impose a particular set of syllabus on the student? The student has come here to learn. Let him learn what is important for him. So we are entering a wisdom society, and in that context, decentralization, autonomy is extremely vital. But we are violating that, and I think we need to realize that there has to be a kind of a global think tank and then local think tank to advise the bureaucratic system, advise the government that this is where the universities or the educational institutions need to go. You cannot just control from above, and it's like what is it called, the puppet dance. The universities are now puppet dancing. Somebody is moving the strings from the higher education department, and these people are all dancing to that. So we need to get out of that. And then we should also remember that education is a system of providing equality of educational opportunities for everybody. I must provide in an educational system equality of opportunity. I must maximize, as an educational system, we must maximize each child's potentials in the way he or she is best potent to develop or to grow. Now, I cannot impose the same thing on everybody. People have their own way of learning. People have their own interests. People have their own thinking. And let me sort of provide a system where I will provide equal opportunities to everybody to grow. So this duality, this private educational system and public educational system is actually doing exactly the opposite of it. People who have, if I have more money, I will provide the education to my child by sending him abroad or sending him to a prestigious private educational system. Whereas the public educational system are all impoverished. And if I cannot pay, those who cannot pay, they send their children to public educational system, which are systematically being downgraded, devalued. So what is happening? We are, instead of providing equality of opportunity, we are creating conditions where those who have will get better opportunities and those who do not have will become more impoverished. So that is what I think I'm concerned about. I'm sure that universities will not necessarily become much better after some restriction is put on the government and bureaucratic control, but it will take time. But if we put our concerted effort and if we put a break on the growth of the private educational institutions, which are actually exploiting the conditions here in India, the poverty of or poor conditions of the public institutions, more we do that, I think the better will be the future of education in this country, because we are not even a country where we have one institution which belongs to the top 100 universities in the world. Why is it that the case? That's because we have not really invested enough on education. We have not really thought about education, and we need to put our mind to it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to invite Professor Lakshmikant Mishra to ask if he has any query. Professor Mishra. Yes.
Yeah. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Namaskar. Bala achanti.
हाँ bala अच्छी. Basically, so the more 3-4 point re कहबार कथा अछि, and on 3-4 points I'll so that Tilochan Pradhan committee, so that was constituted sometime around 2009.
Yeah.
Directly or indirectly, I was little bit associated with it. And the universities, by that time, Ravenshaw had already become a university. And so the universities that came up, and so far my knowledge goes, so this is as per the Tilochan Pradhan's committee's recommendations. So far I know. So I know it that they went ahead with the recommendations, and you told that Tilochan Pradhan's recommendations are going to be cold storage. This is number one. Number two is this process of controlling the university autonomy as far as the syllabi being imposed on the universities. The process has started since 2017. You know that the university recommended for the introduction of the CBCS course, a common syllabus for all the universities. And the universities were asked to make changes up to 20%, taking into consideration the local requirements. And the government of Odisha So the again went a virtually step ahead and asked the vice chancellors and the controller of examinations to come for a meeting, and there they instructed that you you depute the chairman of the board of studies of different subjects, and we shall have a common syllabus for all the universities and colleges of the state. And the vice chancellors, all of them, none of them opposed. It's a good idea. All of them said it's a good idea. And we'll have a common syllabus, we'll have a common entrance, and we'll have a common examination. And all the vice chancellors, Utkala, Sambalpur, Ravenshaw, GM, all the vice chancellors, and they asked the chairman of the board of studies to go over to attend a meeting, and Utkala University was made the the nodal center, and exercises went on, and hopefully in my subject, that is history, the model syllabus, which is the CBCS syllabus, which was provided by by University UGC, was modified. More than 50% modifications were made. And you see the role played by the vice chancellors. And now we have a common syllabus. And coming over to the selection process, what is going on by the OPSC, and you are absolutely wrong. As far as the ancient history, medieval history, the faculty are being chosen as per the requirement of the department and the universities. That is happening. And as per specializations and requirements, and if a population geography is there in Ravenshaw, then a person from population geography is being selected from Ravenshaw for Ravenshaw. And as per specializations, the selection is being made by OPSC, and you have a wrong impression on that issue particularly. I differ from you. And however, coming over to the appointments, everyone knows, and the way the vice chancellors are acting, or the virtually the performing. You see that in Ravenshaw, the government has sanctioned the non-teaching posts since quite a long, since the time of Professor B.C. Tripathi, and the university could not be able to go ahead with recruitments because of court cases and other things. Nothing more to say. That's it.
Okay. Now you have raised some more pertinent questions. Let me look at that. One is Professor Trilochan Pradhan committee. I have seen the report. There are several recommendations in respect of particularly research funding and all that. If the Ravenshaw University thing was taken up, yes, perhaps they did take it up. But the bulk of the report have not been acted upon, particularly in respect of strengthening research funding in the universities, promoting a culture of research in the universities. That was not taken up. What is even more important is that when in 2016 or 17, SP Adhikari committee was set up there is absolutely no acknowledgement of the fact that there was another report which is still pending. Some of its recommendations were there. I wrote an article at that time. I don't remember the last part. The last part of the title was Doleyoile Muluruga. I mean, we are again going back to the same thing in the same kind of process. And I again know that not much of SP Adhikari committee has also been acted upon. So the point is, yes, partly they may have acted upon, I agree with you, since you have the first-hand knowledge of the report. But the point is, report after report, the Odisha government has not shown its sincerity to act upon the report. And then syllabus. Syllabus, uniformity, the basic principle which UGC has been promulgating over the years is that each center has to, each department, each center has to have its own program. Yes, part of it would come from the local requirements and all that, but there are specializations. UGC for a long time have a system of declaring special centers, center of assistance, center of advanced center, and center of special assistance, and all that different pages in which they recognize. For example, in my own discipline, psychology, Utkal became the first department, first center of advanced study in the country, and it had been given some specializations. Education of the disadvantaged was the specialization given that. So if you look into the history of creation of posts, other than the initial setting up of a department, new posts are invariably created with the UGC, under the UGC systems. Every 5-year UGC inspects the universities, and then there are special inspection for on specific projects and programs by the departments. And so UGC's attempt has always been to sort of encourage specializations of different departments, and that is how specializations have come into being in different centers. If you take philosophy, Sanskrit, chemistry, physics, or psychology, or whatever, there are specialized disciplines in which the university, UGC actually encourages the department to go into. That is a more kind of a national mandate. But what actually happens if you club everything, all the syllabus and syllabus diversity, because diversity is basic requirement of university, and diversity initiatives have started for quite a long time. B.H. Krishnamurthy was one of the first, the former Vice Chancellor of Central University, Hyderabad, was the first commission for promoting diversity in the university campuses and all that. And diversity was in terms of academic program as well as in terms of the student body and the structure of the university and so on. Now that diversity is not promoted by having uniform syllabus, because each center is faculty, group of faculties, they have their own way of growing things. So what is happening in Ravenshaw University or what is happening in Utkal University cannot be a replication of each other. They have to be different, and that is one thing that is to be recognized. Now, I do not know if you are saying, I have to accept your point of view that OPSC is perhaps making specialized selections, but we have submitted in our court case document from Higher Education Department and OPSC advertisement, which clubs all the specializations together. You know, I have a document, I cannot often give you the document, but if you look into our court case and the documents that we submitted in favor of our argument, is a set of documents which showed that both at the level of higher, say, what is the process is this? The Higher Education Department writes to the registrars of the Vice Chancellor of the university to submit a list of their positions. And when they do it, departments define the position by specialization, mostly, except perhaps lecturership, reader and professor positions are usually specialized. Now, those that information goes into the Odisha Secretariat Higher Education Department, somebody sits over that, and then when they put the post together for informing the OPSC, they club all these. And I have seen that, I've submitted that document where they are clubbing all the positions under one category. And that is what goes to the OPSC, and OPSC advertises on the categorical disciplines. Whether at the level of selection they are selecting, I do not know. But my point is, if the advertisement is for position of professor of history, regardless of the specialization, then if the selection is on specialization basis, I do not know, but that is probably not even morally right. So there are issues, and Vice Chancellor,
intervene karibi. इंटरवेन करी कौन कि आमर जो ओपीएससी जो एडवर्टाइज गवर्नमेंट यूनिवर्सिटीज माने जो इंडेंट करचंती से माने स्पेशलाइजेशन अनुसार माने मागी चंती गवर्नमेंट को, गवर्नमेंट से अनुसार ओपीएससी को देइछि, ओपीएससी
गवर्नमेंट स्पेशलाइजेशन अनुसार देइनी, स्पेशल मोर डॉक्यूमेंट सबमिट करछि,
स्पेशलाइजेशन अनुसार देइछि एवं स्पेशलाइजेशन अनुसार ही सिलेक्शन होउछि, स्पेशलाइजेशन अनुसार ही, एंड द कैंडिडेट्स नो इट, आउ समस्त जानि चंती
एवं तो मो डॉक्यूमेंट देइछि जियो इन्फॉर्मेटिक्स इज नॉट जियोलॉजी, जियो इन्फॉर्मेटिक्स मोर इन्फॉर्म जदी गोटाए स्पेशलाइजेशन अंडर जियोलॉजी अंडर एडवर्टाइजमेंट देइछि, मु आप सबमिट करछि डॉक्यूमेंट, मु तो कहबे मु आपन पाको
ना ना आपण सबमिट कर थाई परंती, किंतु मु डायरेक्टली इन्वॉल्व,
आपण जानिथिबे
सिलेक्शन प्रोसेस देखुछि ता कहूछि मु जहा देखुछि, कारण प्रोसेसटा स्पेशलाइजेशन नहीं, मु कहया कथा कोन कि स्पेशलाइजेशन टा को डिटरमिन करबा पी से माने जने एक्सपर्ट को ही सुदी सब डिपार्टमेंट रे से माने एंगेज करचंदी, तेनु कोन आपन डॉक्यूमेंट देइचंदी मु कहि परिबिनी,
माने मु देइची सुनंतु, आमे देइचू ओडिसा गवर्नमेंट रो जो चिट्ठी ओपीएससी को जाईची एवं ता पूर्व डॉक्यूमेंट जो से माने क्लब करचंती स्पेशलाइजेशन उडाको सेडा करके से डॉक्यूमेंट हम देइचू, ओपीएससी को लेखा है जे या चिट्ठी जे तमे एई पोस्ट रे एतिक जियोलॉजी रे 5 जण प्रोफेसर, उत्कल ले जणे, अमकर जणे, सेठी स्पेशलाइजेशन लेखा है नै, मोरे जदि से माने स्पेशलाइजेशन रे सिलेक्शन करथबे, दैट्स अ डिफरेंट मैटर। एटा मु देइची डॉक्यूमेंट जेहेतु हमें आई कैन नॉट कमिट ए परजुरी बाय सबमिटिंग ए डॉक्यूमेंट व्हिच इज रॉन्ग, यू नो,
नहीं मु से कथा कहूनी, किंतु सुदी जो माने इंटरव्यू देइचंती आपण से मानको पाइचंती, से मानको आपण कांटेक्ट करी बुझी परबे एवं दिस इज हैपनिंग।
अच्छा एही तो बट आई एम, यू नो, इट्स नॉट जस्ट वन इशू, इट्स मोर,
कारण से इकोनॉमिक्स हो कि एंथ्रोपोलॉजी हो कि जो सब्जेक्ट सब वेरिफिकेशन सरीची, सेठी से माने एक्सपर्ट मानकर ओपिनियन नै चंती, एवं तरंतु सुदी हिस्ट्री तो ए पर्यंत हेइनी, आउ से क्लब हेइनी, मु जानि छी
मोर
ठीक अछि। I don't want to take the matter so the head, आउरी अन्य क्वेश्चन थिबो, आउ ठीक अछि, थैंक यू, बहुत दिन पर मु आपण से तो कथार्ता और सुयोग मिलला,
ना जाओ माने मो कहे कथा जनरली माने हमरो वी नीड टू लुक एट ए ब्रॉडर पर्सपेक्टिव रे जे कोन प्रकृति रे यूनिवर्सिटीज रा तो गोटे कंट्रोल रे रहिवा दरकार कि ना, ए विषय रे हम माने समस्त वी शुड एक्चुअली थिंक अबाउट इट, माने कहूनी जे यूनिवर्सिटी मु कोन जगह रे कहूनी जे एटा सरी गले यूनिवर्सिटी पूरा बदल जिवो, ता नो, यूनिवर्सिटी विल नॉट चेंज दैट मच, किंतु ଆମର minimum condition of university's autonomy has to be respected, सेटा हला मोर मेन प्रिंसिपल, but world over सेया होची कथा, सेटा को बुझिवा कथा।
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mishra, for very fascinating questions. Sir, at the when we are going to wind up this session, I would like to few suggestions and few submissions also. Sir, first, I would like to draw your attention. You nicely talked about 62 minutes of your lecture. I would like to know what is the difference between NET and PhD in terms of thinking. What universities are concerned for the thinking ability, how to develop a person particular. Then, if you look back, 2009 University Amendment Act, 2013, 2016, 2018, 2020 and 21. Absolutely all are always violated by many. State Universities Amendment Act as particular concern. And then this particular, you rightly mentioned about the autonomy of the universities. Sir, universities are meant for research. Universities are not meant for just distributing of certificates. And you join somebody and take certificate in convocations, and somebody takes certificate and walling in his wall. It's not decorative, I think so. And at the end, when intellectuality, it's very meaningless about when people are talking about rightly the farce what Odisha government is doing now. It's really very unfortunate when Supreme Court someone challenged and Supreme Court give a message to the state, don't allow further. But people are doing absolutely very unfortunate. What is your suggestion, sir? And
more of my
state.
My suggestion
Yes,
is
sir.
that
When you talked about bureaucratic nature,
be
particular, sir. Sir, do you believe the bureaucratic people, those don't have even the single idea about the research? They are the subject committee head. They are the selection committee head of the vice chancellors. And those people are getting, the vice chancellor particular, those are recruited as vice chancellor. How much they concern what they are doing? I feel so they are doing social crime rather doing criminal negligences. What is your suggestion, sir?
See, by the way, the process in which the vice chancellors are now selected through a process of bureaucratic control. এবং এইটা আমি পয়েন্ট আউট করিଛୁ এটা ডক্টর মিশ্র ମଧ୍ୟ ଜାଣିଥିବେ ୟୁଜିସି କହୁଛି ସବୁବେଳେ ୟୁଜିସି କହୁଛି ଯେ ମିନିମମ୍ 10 ବର୍ଷର ଏକ୍ସପିରିଏନ୍ସ ଥିବ ଏବଂ ଏକାଡେମିସିଆନ ଏମିନେଟ ଏକାଡେମିସିଆନ ହେଇଥିବ ସେଇମାନଙ୍କ ଭିତରୁ ସିଲେକ୍ଟେଡ ହେବେ ଭାଇସ ଚାନ୍ସେଲର ଏବଂ ଯୋଉ ବଡିଟା ସିଲେକ୍ଟ କରିବ they also have to be academicians. କାହିଁକିନା academic ମାନେ ମୁଁ କହିବା କଥା ଯେ ଜଣେ ଲୋକ ଖୁବ ସକ୍ସେସଫୁଲ ଆର୍ମି ଜେନେରାଲ ହେଇଥିବ ତାକୁ କଣ ଆମେ ଗୋଟେ ହସ୍ପିଟାଲକୁ ମ୍ୟାନେଜ କରିବାକୁ ରଖିବା କି? He may have been very successful army general. ତେଣୁ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ଲୋକ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ଡିସିପ୍ଲିନର ଗୋଟେ ସ୍ପେଶାଲାଇଜେସନ ଅଛି ଏବଂ ଆକାଡେମିକ administration, research, university administration is a specialized thing. ତାକୁ ଏମାନେ କଣ କଲେ ନା ଚାନ୍ସେଲରଙ୍କ ନମିନି as well as ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ ନମିନି ସବୁ ବ୍ୟୁରୋକ୍ରାଟ୍ସ ଜଣେ ୟୁଜିସି ର ନମିନି ରହିଲା ଆଉ ଅନ୍ୟମାନେ ତାଙ୍କର ନମିନି ହେଲେ ବ୍ୟୁରୋକ୍ରାଟ ଏବଂ ସେଥିରେ ଲେଖା ହେଲା ଦିସ୍ ଇଜ ସମଥିଙ୍ଗ ୟୁ ସୁଡ୍ ନୋ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ ଯେତେବେଳେ ସବମିଶନ କଲା ଆମର କେସ୍ ଉପରେ ସେତେବେଳେ କହିଲା ଯେ ଯିଏ ଭାଇସ ଚାନ୍ସେଲର ହବ ତାର ଗୋଟେ ଆଡମିନିଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଟିଭ କାପାସିଟି ଦରକାର ସେଇ ସକାଶେ we kept eminent bureaucrats in order to select for administrative capability. Administrative capability by selection କରୁଛୁ. Vice chancellor has to be an academic leader. ଗୋଟେ ଭଲ ରିସର୍ଚ୍ଚର ହବା ଦରକାର ଯିଏ କି ନିଜର ଏକ୍ସାମ୍ପଲ ଦେଖେଇବ to the faculty. ଏବଂ ୟୁଜିସି ବାରମ୍ବାର ସେ କଥା କହୁଛି ଯେ academic vice chancellor is an academic leader. ଆମେ କଣ କଲୁ ନା ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ କହିଲା ଆମେ ସିଲେକ୍ଟ କରୁଛୁ ଫର ଦେୟାର ଆଡମିନିଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଟିଭ ଏଫିକାସି ସେଠୁ ଆମେ ଦେଖେଇଲୁ ଦି ଡିସ୍କ୍ରିପାନ୍ସି ବିଟୱିନ୍ ଦେୟାର ଆଡଭର୍ଟାଇଜମେଣ୍ଟ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଦେୟାର ପ୍ରୋସେସ ଅଫ ସିଲେକ୍ସନ ଆଡଭର୍ଟାଇଜମେଣ୍ଟରେ ଦେ ଆର ଶୋଇଂ ଦ୍ୟାଟ वी नीड ଆକାଡେମିସିଆନ୍ସ ଏମିନେଣ୍ଟ ଆକାଡେମିସିଆନ୍ ସୁଡ୍ ଆପ୍ଲାଇ एकथा ଲେଖା ହଉଛି କିନ୍ତୁ ସିଲେକ୍ସନରେ କୁହା ହଉଛି ଯେ ନା ଆମେ ସିଲେକ୍ଟ କରୁଛୁ ଫର ଆଡମିନିଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଟିଭ ସ୍କିଲ୍ସ so that's a discrepancy in its own right. तेणु ये जो प्रोसेसटा चली ए प्रोसेस शुड स्टॉप जे गवर्नमेंट सब कथा कंट्रोल कर दे कि माने बेटर कर देबे दैट इज नॉट ट्रू बरं लेट देयर बी थिंकिंग अबाउट इट केमिति आमे यूनिवर्सिटी को बेटर करिबा केमिति यूनिवर्सिटी को अधिक ऑटोनॉमी दे कि तांको गोटे ऑटोनॉमी सहित गोटे रिस्पांसिबिलिटी मध्ये रहइबो मु कहूनी ऑटोनॉमी विदाउट रिस्पांसिबिलिटी autonomy also should give the universities a responsibility to prove their worth जदि यूनिवर्सिटी माने सिलेक्शन करि परनांती वर्ष वर्ष धरि कि जहा लक्ष्मीकांत कहउतले नॉन टीचिंग स्टाफ मध्ये सिलेक्शन बट देयर शुड बी ए प्रोसेस ऑफ फिक्सिंग द रिस्पांसिबिलिटी एवं मु जहा जानि कि उत्कल यूनिवर्सिटी रो सिस्टम रे मु जहा जानि कि सिलेक्शन उडा को हेइ पर नथला नॉट बिकॉज़ द यूनिवर्सिटीज डिडंट वांट इट और डिडंट टेक स्टेप्स because even then even before the 2020 amendment act even before that the selection processes had to be okayed by the state government एवं सही प्रोसेस रे डिले होतला गोटे पॉइंट रे तम कहले तमे गो आउट सिलेक्शन तापरे पुनी कोन हैला से कहले सिलेक्शन बंद करो आई नो दिस फर्स्ट हैंड फ्रॉम उत्कल यूनिवर्सिटी तेनु ए जो कंट्रोल प्रोसेस ता को हमें बंद करी कि आमे कहिबा आमे आउर माने लेट द यूनिवर्सिटीज बी सब्जेक्टेड टू क्वेश्चन के मना करनी वाइस चांसलर मन को क्वेश्चन करा जाऊ मीडिया क्वेश्चन करू पब्लिक क्वेश्चन करू गवर्नमेंट क्वेश्चन करू चांसलर क्वेश्चन करू बट दे हैव टू प्रूव देयर वर्थ के मना करनी सेटा करिया के किंतु तांकर हाथ रे बेडी पके कि हाथ गोड़ रे बेडी पके कि तां कंट्रोल करि कि जे आमे ये करिवो दैट इज नॉट कंट्रोल करिवो सेटा ठीक कत नु तेनु सेही जिंसटा हमर आई थिंक वी नीड टू चेंज मोर जहा धारणा जे आमे गोटे या ऊपर गोटे पब्लिक डायलॉग हो एवं डायलॉग बेसिस रे आमे कोन केउ प्रकार करिवो यूनिवर्सिटी माने अकाउंटेबल हो मु सेतरे मोटे दिउमत नाही मोर किंतु that accountability should not be at the cost of their autonomy being taken मु जति गोड़ हाथ बांधिकरी यूनिवर्सिटी को मांकड़ नचेला वाले बाहर नचेले bureaucratic process रे how can I hold the universities responsible for anything तेणु सेटा that is the point that let us provide autonomy let us provide public support to the universities let us provide the grant that the universities need to grow and develop तापरे हमें autonomy तांकर autonomy की question करियो तापरे हमें will question as to whether they are functioning fully well or not सेटा न करी करी हमें all of a sudden गोटे act कर दे कि तांको autonomy नहीं जो तांको बांधि पकेबो एतरे कोन लाभ होची it is nobody is gaining out of that वर्तमान कौन के is government answerable as to why universities are not functioning have the universities function 2020 रो 2 वर्ष हो गला have things changed so that is the point is let there be first minimum condition is let us give autonomy to the universities full autonomy and support financial and other moral support tapore then we can question whether the universities are functioning optimally or not यदि optimally function करछि न करछि ताले the public and the government and others can take corrective measures do not mean by passing a law in the assembly and controlling them no corrective measure कोन ने आइ परिबो for example गोटे छोटो इंस्टेंस आपण माने अनेक अछि गोटे कथा कहछि जवाहरलाल नेहरू यूनिवर्सिटी रे जो रिसर्च फंडिंग करूछि ताधरे आपण माने समस्त जानि छथि जे ओडिसा रे मध्ये से गोटे ओवरहेड आसे रिसर्च ग्रांट सहित मनकर मु 15 लाख टंकार गोटे रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट पाइले ताधरो 1.5 लाख एट लीस्ट आउ अनेक केस रे अधिका मध्ये दैट विल गो टू द इंस्टीट्यूशन से पैसाटा खर्च करिवो फॉर इट्स डेवलपमेंट काइना इंस्टीट्यूशन दउची फैसिलिटी घर दउची इलेक्ट्रिसिटी दउची पानी दउची गोटे रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट काम करिया पे जवाहरलाल नेहरू यूनिवर्सिटी आई हैड ए प्रोजेक्ट मोर विभिन्न समय रे प्रोजेक्ट रे मु प्राय वी हैड गॉट अबाउट 15 crore रु आम बेले अन्य माने साइंस वाला बहुत अधिक दउतले आमे 10% देकरी 1.5 crore आई कंट्रीब्यूटेड टू द जवाहरलाल नेहरू यूनिवर्सिटी एवं से टंकाटा आउ इंटरेस्टिंग होची से टंकाटा part of it that money 75% of that came back to the project director जो माने कि तांकर निजर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एवं निजर एकेडमिक ट्रैवल ए सब करिया पे हम खर्च करथुलु हमें तेनु देयर इज एन एनकरेजमेंट सिस्टम जे तमे जेते अधिका रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट दबो सेतिकी तमरो निजर डेवलपमेंट पाई निजर इंटरनेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस अटेंड करिया पे सेतिक पैसा अधिका मिलिबो ए कथा तो मु बारंबार उत्कल यूनिवर्सिटी कहि आछि ताकर क्वालिटी मॉनिटरिंग कमिटी रे मु थिली 3-4-5 वर्ष बारंबार कहि छै आपण माने सेया करो से रिसर्च ताले कोन हो लोक माने दे विल बी मोर एनकरेज टू प्रोवाइड रिसर्च सबमिट रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट्स एवं फंडिंग पाइबे ता न करी आपण सेटा न करिवे काहे गवर्नमेंट रो नियम सेटा ताहले प्रॉब्लम हो से दैट इज वन एग्जांपल आई एम सेइंग दैट ऑटोनॉमी हमें देइकरी जदी लोक मानकु तांको अकाउंटेबिलिटी स्ट्रक्चर को आणंतो ताहले थिंग्स विल बी बेटर लेट अस थिंक अबाउट इट irrespective of what is going to happen in the Supreme Court in the instant case, we do not know. But regardless of that, we all should join together. The intellectuals, the masses, the public will join together to pressurize the government to give more autonomy to the universities and also insist on greater accountability. ताहले बोधे किछिटा improvement हो बोले मु भाबुची. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very kind suggestions and very submissions kind of things. Thank you so much for the host institution from Ravenshaw University as well. Our PG Council Chairman with us, Professor Asima Sauji, and Central University Koraput and I am Sambalpur. Many of you Facebook and YouTube. Now I'd like to invite Rudunaran to go for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, and looking forward for future engagements. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zena, for inviting me for the formal vote of thanks. It's a very outstanding and wonderful discussion and debate between our esteemed guest speaker and with our esteemed participant professors and others. It was a very important discussion, and the need of the hour discussion is going on since approximately 2 hours. It was a very important, and we all peoples who are in the part of the higher education system, particularly in Odisha, who want to transform the education system and create some new ideas and new plethora of thoughts to develop among our research scholars and among our higher education students. It is very important to know what is happening in the universities and what is happening in the colleges and what kind of problems and what kind of subjugations are they faced, and what kind of changes that we have to be supposed to pressurize the government that Professor Mohanty said. It was a very wonderful discussion. Thank you, sir, for being with us and throw light on several issues and your suggestions to improve the education system as well. Thank you, Professor Mohanty, for being as a guest speaker in World Human Sciences and Management Conference and giving your very important time. And I would like to thank the institutional support for Ravenshaw University, Central University of Odisha Koraput, and Indian Institute of Management Sambalpur, and our patrons, Professor Joyswal, Professor Naik, and Professor Palita, for their relentless support through Center for ADIVASI Research and Development to find out the new educational and social issues to address by the eminent field speakers. Now I would like to thank our conveners, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Professor Charudat Panigrahi, for their relentless help and guidance to discuss over several social issues. And thank you all our team members who made us help to organize this conference worldwide still 1 year. And thank you all our participants, our students who join us and watch us live in Facebook and YouTube and here in Zoom. Thank you so much for your precious time. Thank you, sir.
Namaskar, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.